When Jax wrapped both soft paws around Dr. Ryan's forearm that morning, we instantly knew this was no ordinary cub behavior. No one inside the Lakewood Wildlife Clinic had the slightest clue that a rescued lion cub named Jax was about to turn a routine wellness check into one of the most charming and hilarious displays of pure innocence we'd ever witnessed. I'm Emily Thompson, 32 years old, and I run a small wildlife sanctuary tucked in the pine-covered foothills outside Lakewood, Colorado. Jax had been with us for 14 months. We rescued him as a tiny, underweight cub from a situation that never should have existed. From day one, he became part of our family. That crisp fall morning, Jax padded beside me into the clinic with his tail held high, looking every inch the perfect angelic little lion. He hopped straight onto the shiny examination table, sat down neatly, and turned those enormous amber eyes toward Ryan, with the most innocent expression imaginable, as if to say, "Me, I'm just sitting here being good." What followed was a masterclass in playing innocent. Jax tilted his head just so, let out the softest, sweetest chuff you've ever heard, and gently pressed his forehead against Ryan's hand like he was the most cooperative patient in the world. Every time Ryan tried to move forward with the exam, Jax responded with another wide-eyed look, another tiny lean, another velvet soft paw placed ever so carefully. The room filled with quiet laughter because it was impossible not to melt. He was so convincing, so adorably earnest that for several long minutes we almost believed he really was just being a model cub. But deep down, I could feel it. Jax was up to something, and the way the entire morning built toward that final, unexpected moment still has the whole team cracking up whenever we talk about it. Before we jump deeper into Jax's unforgettable performance, drop a comment below and let me know what time is it right now where you are and what city or town are you watching from. It blows my mind every time to see how far these rescue stories reach. If you love heartwarming wildlife moments like this one, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for the next adventure. Now, let's get back to the morning this rescued lion cub decided to play completely innocent with the vet. The drive to the clinic that morning felt peaceful, but I could already sense Jax was in one of his playful moods. I loaded the harness into the truck just after sunrise. Jax sat patiently in the passenger seat, watching every movement with those alert ears turned forward. He knew the routine clinic days meant a car ride, new smells, and usually a few extra treats if he behaved. I clipped the safety tether to his harness, gave him a quick scratch under the chin and said, "Let's make this easy today, okay, buddy?" He answered, with a low, rumbling chuff that I'd learned to read as agreement. The sanctuary sits on 12 acres of rolling land at the edge of the national forest. We keep it small on purpose, only a handful of permanent residents at any time, so each animal gets individual attention. Jax arrived here in late winter last year after a tip came in about an unlicensed breeder operating out of an old ranch house 2 counties over. The local wildlife officer found him in a small wire pen with no shelter, barely weaned and severely underweight. The rest of the litter hadn't made it. When the officer carried Jax out, the cub pressed his face into the man's jacket and didn't let go. That's how I ended up driving 3 hours to pick him up. The paperwork took weeks, but once the court ruled the breeder had violated state and federal wildlife laws, Jax officially became a ward of our facility. He's been thriving ever since, gaining weight, learning to climb low platforms, practicing his roar, which still sounds more like a squeaky growl. I pulled onto the highway and kept the window cracked so Jax could catch the scent of pine and damp earth. He rested his head on the console, eyes half closed, completely relaxed. Every few minutes he'd lift his head to look at me, then settle again. It's one of the things I love most about him, he checks in. Even on the quietest drives, he makes sure I'm still there. Lakewood Wildlife Clinic is about 25 minutes from the sanctuary. It's a low brick building with large windows and a fenced outdoor yard for patients who need fresh air during recovery. Ryan Mitchell has run the place for 15 years. He's the only vet in the region with consistent experience handling big cats, and he's the reason we can keep Jax close instead of sending him to a larger facility 3 states away. Sarah Bennett has been his lead technician for almost 4 years. She's quick, calm under pressure, and has an uncanny ability to read animal body language before anyone else notices a shift. I parked in the side lot, reserved for sanctuary vehicles. Jax waited until I opened his door, then hopped down with that deliberate grace he's had since he was 6 months old. He shook himself once, stretched his front legs forward until his back arched, then looked up at me expectantly. I attached the long lead, and we walked toward the entrance together. The receptionist glanced up as the door chimed. "Morning, Emily. Jax looks ready to rule the world today." "He always does," I said, smiling. "We're a little early, no problem. Ryan's finishing a blood draw on a hawk in room 2. Sarah will take you back in just a minute." Jack sat neatly beside my leg tail, curled around his paws, watching the lobby with mild interest. A young intern walked past, carrying a tray of syringes. Jax tracked her movement but didn't stand. He was saving his energy. Sarah appeared from the hallway a moment later, scrub-top sleeves rolled to her elbows, a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Hey, you two! Exam room 3 is ready. Come on back." We followed her down the short corridor. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and warmed bedding material. Jax padded along beside me, head high, ears swiveling at every sound. When we reached the doorway, he paused, sniffed the threshold, then stepped inside without hesitation. The exam table was already covered with a fresh, disposable pad. Overhead lights cast a clean, even glow. Ryan was washing his hands at the sink. He turned, dried them on a paper towel, and gave Jax a warm nod. "Morning, big guy. Looking strong." Jax answered by walking straight to the table, placing his front paws on the edge and waiting. Ryan chuckled. "All right, up you go." I lifted Jax the last few inches. He could jump it easily, but preferred the assist on slick surfaces. Once on the table, he sat, facing Ryan, chest puffed slightly, the picture of calm confidence. Sarah moved to the side counter, opening a drawer to prepare the basic tools, stethoscope, thermometer, penlight, gloves. Ryan stepped closer. "Let's start with vitals." While he settled, heart and lungs first, he reached for the stethoscope. Jax watched the movement carefully, but didn't flinch. Ryan placed the disc gently against Jax's left side. The cub held perfectly still, breathing slow and even. After a few seconds, Ryan nodded. "Sounds excellent. Lungs clear, heart rate steady at 120. Sarah jotted the numbers on the chart. "Wait," Ryan motioned for me to help. We guided Jax onto the built-in scale at the end of the table. He stood without protest while the digital display climbed and settled. 142 pounds. Sarah read aloud. "He's put on almost 18 pounds since last check." "Good, steady gain," Ryan said. "Coat looks great too. No bald patches, no dandruff." Jax chose that moment to lean forward and bump his forehead lightly against Ryan's chest. It was a small gesture, but deliberate. Ryan smiled and gave him a quick scratch behind the ear. "You're making this too easy, kid." I laughed under my breath. "Give him time. He's just warming up." Sarah grinned. "I've got treats in the drawer if we need to bribe him later." Jax's ears flicked at the word treats. He turned his head toward her eyes, brightening for the first time since we entered the room. Sarah pulled a small salmon-flavored cube from a jar and held it out on her palm. Jax sniffed, then took it gently, careful not to graze her skin with his teeth. "Polite, as always," she said. Ryan finished his initial visual check, eyes, ears, gums, teeth, and stepped back to review the chart. "Everything looks textbook so far. Let's move to the abdominal palpation next." That's usually where he gets a little wiggly. I felt a small flutter in my stomach. Abdominal palpation was the part Jax had started resisting a few months ago. Not aggressively, he never lashed out, but he would shift his weight, roll slightly, or press his belly flat against the table until Ryan gave up and tried a different angle. We'd never figured out exactly why. Sometimes I wondered if it was just teenage stubbornness. Other times I thought maybe he remembered something from before we got him. Ryan pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "Okay, Jax, nice and easy. Just gonna feel your belly." Jax watched him approach. His tail gave one slow sweep across the pad. He didn't move away. He simply adjusted his posture so his front legs were braced a little wider and his weight settled more firmly downward. Ryan placed both hands lightly on Jax's sides, starting the gentle pressing motion that would let him check for any unusual masses, organ enlargement, or discomfort. Jax held still for the first few seconds. Then, very slowly, he began to lean his entire body weight to the left, just enough to make Ryan's hands slide off center. "He's doing the lean away already." "Yep." Ryan tried again, this time from the right side. Jax mirrored the movement perfectly, shifting right so the pressure moved off the midline again. I crossed my arms. He's not tensing up. He's just blocking. Ryan straightened. "Let's try standing him up and doing it from underneath." We coaxed Jax to stand. He cooperated. But the moment Ryan's hands came near his abdomen again, Jax sat down abruptly, planting his hindquarters firmly on the table and tucking his tail around his legs like a door closing. Sarah laughed, quietly. "That's new." Ryan peeled off the gloves and tossed them in the bin. "Okay. Plan B. We'll do the blood draw and vaccines first. Let him relax a little, then circle back to the belly." Jax looked up at Ryan with what could only be described as mild satisfaction. I reached over and rubbed his shoulder. "You're not fooling anyone, sweetheart." But the truth was, he almost was. As soon as Jax hopped onto the examination table, the real performance began. He settled immediately into a perfect sit. Back straight, front paws aligned, tail wrapped neatly around his haunches. The overhead lights caught the golden flecks in his coat and turned his eyes into wide, luminous pools of amber. He looked directly at Ryan, blinked once slowly, then tilted his head 5 degrees to the left in that way. Only big cats can manage, without looking ridiculous. The tilt said, "Everything I am," the picture of cooperation. Ryan picked up the otoscope first. "Let's check those ears while he's calm." He leaned in. Jax didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly toward the instrument, offering the right ear like he was presenting a gift. Ryan inserted the speculum gently. Jax held rock, still only the tiniest twitch at the tip of one ear, betraying that he felt the cool metal. After a few seconds, Ryan pulled back. Both canals clean. No mites, no debris. Sarah made a note on the chart. "He's making you look good, boss." Ryan gave a half smile. He always starts like this. Next came the paw exam. Ryan reached for Jax's right front leg. "Lift for me, buddy." Jax raised the paw on cue, high, deliberate pads, facing up like he'd practiced in front of a mirror. Ryan flexed each digit, checked the claws, felt along the wrist joint. Jax kept the leg extended until Ryan released it, then lowered it with exaggerated care and immediately offered the left one without being asked. Sarah leaned against the counter, arms crossed, grinning. "He's showing off now." I couldn't help laughing. He knows he's cute. He's weaponizing it. Ryan moved to the shoulders, running both hands along the muscle lines in slow, firm strokes. Jax arched his back into the touch, just enough to signal enjoyment, then let out a single soft chuff, low and melodic. The kind of sound that makes people stop what they're doing and smile involuntarily. Ryan paused mid-stroke. "That's a new one, almost like he's purring." Jax repeated the chuff this time, adding a tiny head bump against Ryan's forearm. The vet shook his head. "You're killing me here, kid." Sarah stepped closer with the penlight. "Let me get his eyes while he's in love with you." She clicked the light on, shielded Jax's face slightly, and checked pupil response. Jax stared straight into the beam without blinking, once pupils contracting smoothly. When she switched it off, he blinked twice, slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. "Pupils equal and reactive," Sarah said. "And he's giving you the slow blink. That's cat for, I trust you completely." Ryan snorted. Or, please keep petting me. He moved down to the chest, pressing lightly over the rib cage to feel for symmetry and expansion. Jax expanded his chest on cue, drawing in a deep breath that made his whole frame rise like a bellows. Ryan listened again, with the stethoscope, longer this time moving from side to side. Still perfect. No murmurs, no crackles. Jax chose that moment to lean forward and rest his chin gently on Ryan's wrist. The vet froze for half a second, then chuckled. Okay, that's blatant bribery. Sarah covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. He's got you wrapped around his paw. Literally. I reached over and ran my fingers along Jax's jawline. You're laying it on thick today, sweetheart. Jax responded by turning his head into my hand, pressing so hard my fingers sank into the thick ruff around his neck. He chuffed again, quieter, this time almost conversational. Ryan tried to slide his hand free to check the opposite shoulder. Jax immediately shifted his weight so his chest followed the hand, keeping contact. Ryan raised an eyebrow. He's countering every move. Sarah nodded. It's like he's saying, nope, stay right here. Ryan attempted the hind legs next. Okay, big guy, let's see those back feet. He reached toward the right hind paw. Jax lifted it promptly again, high and proud, then placed it back down before Ryan could finish the inspection. When Ryan tried again, Jax lifted the left hind instead, as if offering a substitute. Sarah burst out laughing. He's picking which one you get to touch. Ryan sat back on his stool. This is a first. He's directing traffic. Jax, apparently pleased with himself, stretched his front legs forward until his claws extended just slightly against the pad, then retracted them. He looked from Ryan to Sarah to me, tail giving one contented flick. Ryan rubbed his chin. All right, we've got vitals, eyes, ears, teeth, coat, and most joints. The only thing left is the abdomen, and we both know that's where the drama usually starts. Jax's ears flicked forward at the word abdomen. He didn't tense. He simply adjusted his posture so his belly was pressed a fraction closer to the table, surface weight evenly distributed, looking for all the world like the most relaxed patient imaginable. Sarah tilted her head. He's not even fidgeting yet. He's too good. When he's this cooperative, it usually means he's planning something. Ryan pulled on a new pair of gloves. Let's find out. He placed both palms flat on Jax's flanks again, thumbs pointing toward the midline. Jax let the hands rest there for 3 full seconds. Then with exquisite slowness, he rolled his shoulders forward just enough to bring his chest down and create a gentle barrier between Ryan's hands and the lower abdomen. Ryan exhaled through his nose. There we go. The famous Jax roll. Sarah whispered. It's adorable. He's not fighting. He's just redirecting. Jax followed the roll with another soft chuff, this one rising slightly at the end, like a question. He looked up at Ryan. With those enormous eyes, blinked slowly twice, then rested his head sideways on the table, so his cheek pressed against the cool steel. Ryan tried from the opposite side. Jax mirrored the movement perfectly, rolling the other way, chest down, belly shielded, expression serene. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. He's mirroring you like it's a dance. I crossed my arms tighter. He's not uncomfortable. He's just decided that spot is off limits today. Ryan kept his voice calm. Jax, buddy, I need to feel there. It's quick. Jax answered by lifting his head and pressing his forehead firmly against Ryan's chest again, longer, this time more insistent. The vet's hands stilled. Okay, Ryan said quietly. Message received. Sarah stepped forward and offered her hand. Jax immediately turned to her, rubbing his cheek along her knuckles with obvious affection. She laughed softly. Now he's playing favorites to distract you. Ryan peeled off the gloves again. We'll give him a minute. Maybe he'll relax if we back off. Jax, sensing the pause, stretched luxuriously, front legs extended back, arched tail sweeping in a wide arc. When he finished, he sat up straight again, looking immensely pleased with himself. Sarah glanced at me. Your boy is a professional. I sighed, half amused, half resigned. He really is. Ryan stood up, stretching his back. Let's take 5. Grab some water. When we come back, we'll try one more time, gently. Jax watched him leave the room, then turned those bright eyes on me. He chuffed once, short, triumphant, and leaned into my side. Ryan tried a different approach, but Jax had already perfected his innocent act. He came back into the room, carrying a small towel folded over his arm, something soft to place under Jax if needed. Jax watched him enter ears, pricked, then immediately lowered his head and let out a long, rolling chuff that started deep in his chest and ended in a gentle sigh. The sound filled the small space like a quiet plea. Ryan paused in the doorway for half a second before continuing. "All right, let's try standing you up again," Ryan said, voice even. "We'll go slow." Jax slid off the table without resistance, paws landing softly on the tile. He stood tall, shoulders square, looking up at Ryan with complete openness. Ryan crouched to eye level and extended his hand, palm up. Jax stepped forward without hesitation, pressing his broad forehead into the open palm. He held the contact, eyes half closed, then began a slow, deliberate rub cheek, sliding along Ryan's wrist, then back again. Ryan exhaled softly. "You're really turning on the charm now." Jax didn't stop. He leaned his full weight forward, rubbing harder, the coarse whiskers brushing Ryan's sleeve. Then he opened his mouth just enough to let his rough tongue dart out once, twice lapping gently at the back of Ryan's hand. Not a quick swipe, these were slow, intentional licks, each one accompanied by another low chuff that vibrated against Ryan's skin. Sarah watched from the side, counter one hand over her mouth. "He's straight up romancing you." Ryan laughed, despite himself. "I've had patients try to bribe me before, but never this effectively." Jax switched targets. He turned his head towards Sarah, stretched his neck as far as it would go, and pressed his nose against her forearm. Sarah froze for a second, then relaxed and let him rub. Jax responded by licking the inside of her wrist, long, careful strokes, while his tail swayed in slow, contented arcs behind him. Sarah looked down at him. "Okay, you win. You're officially the sweetest distraction I've seen all week." Jax chuffed in response, short and bright, almost like he understood the compliment. He lingered there a moment longer, then pivoted back to Ryan, pressing his entire side against the vet's leg. Ryan placed a steadying hand on Jax's shoulder to keep him balanced. The cub took immediate advantage, leaning in until his head rested against Ryan's thigh, eyes looking upward with quiet intensity. Emily watched the exchange, arms folded loosely. Something about the persistence of Jax's affection felt calculated. Not aggressive, not fearful, just very purposeful. He wasn't trying to escape the exam. He was trying to keep everyone focused on his face, his paws, his chuffs. Ryan tried to ease his hand under Jax's ribcage while the cub was distracted. Jax sensed the movement instantly. Without lifting his head, he shifted his weight, so his body curved around Ryan's arm, blocking access to the midline. Then he lifted one front paw and placed it gently on Ryan's forearm pads, soft claws sheathed, holding it there like a velvet anchor. Ryan stopped. "And there's the paw hold. Classic." Sarah stepped closer. "He's not pushing you away. He's just asking you to stay put." Jax reinforced the request by licking Ryan's sleeve, slow circles over the spot where the paw rested. The chuff that followed was deeper, almost emotional, rising and falling like a quiet conversation only Jax understood. Emily felt a small knot form in her stomach. This wasn't the usual stubbornness. Jax had layers of tactics today, charm, contact, sound, and he was deploying them in perfect sequence. She knelt beside him, resting one hand on his back. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "what are you so worried about?" Jax turned his head toward her voice. He released Ryan's arm, stepped over to her, and pressed his forehead against her collarbone. The contact was warm, solid. He chuffed again, longer this time, the vibration traveling through her shirt. Then he licked her chin, once quick, reassuring, before settling his weight against her side. Sarah watched the shift. "He just switched to you." like you're the safe zone." Ryan stood up slowly, giving Jax space. He's using affection like a shield. Every time we get close to the belly, he redirects with contact or sound. Emily ran her fingers through the thick mane along Jax's neck. He's never been this strategic. It's like he thinks if he loves us hard enough, we'll forget the exam. Jax responded by rubbing his cheek against her shoulder, then turning to Sarah again. He stretched up on his hind legs, front paws resting lightly on her thighs, and licked the edge of her scrub pocket. Sarah laughed and scratched under his chin. "You're relentless," she said. "I almost feel guilty for laughing." Jax dropped back to all fours, circled once, then sat between Emily and Ryan, positioned exactly, so both had easy access to his head and shoulders, but his lower body stayed angled away from direct reach. Ryan crossed his arms. He's created a perimeter. Head and front get all the love. Belly stays protected. Emily studied Jax's posture. His breathing was steady, eyes bright, tail relaxed, but every few seconds his gaze flicked downward to his own midsection, then back up to the humans. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she caught it. "He's guarding something," she said quietly. "Not because he's hurt, because he doesn't want us to find it." Sarah tilted her head. "Like what he doesn't have pockets." Emily didn't answer right away. She remembered the way Jax had carried a small stuffed toy around the sanctuary yard last week, hiding it under a bush, retrieving it only when no one was watching. He'd done the same with a rubber ball the month before. Small treasures always concealed until he chose to reveal them. Jax chuffed again, soft, almost apologetic, and leaned into her leg. His paw came up, resting lightly on her knee pads, warm against her jeans. Ryan watched the gesture. He knows we're onto him, and he's doubling down on the cute factor. Sarah nodded. "It's working too. I'm half ready to call the exam done, just so he'll keep doing that chuff." Emily stroked Jax's ear. "We can't let him win this one, though. Whatever he's hiding, it could be important." Jax seemed to sense the shift in tone. He lifted his head, looked directly at her, and let out one more chuff, longer, quieter, almost pleading. Then he pressed his nose into her palm and licked once, slow, deliberate. Emily felt her resolve soften just a fraction. "You're making this really hard, buddy." Ryan stepped back toward the counter. "Let's regroup for a second. Maybe a short break will loosen him up." Jax watched him move away, then turned back to Emily and Sarah, tail sweeping once across the floor. He sat tall again, chest out, the picture of calm innocence. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that behind those wide eyes and gentle licks, Jax was holding on to something he wasn't ready to share. The moment Ryan's hand moved closer to Jax's belly, everything changed. Jax's entire body stiffened, not a flinch, not a recoil, but a sudden total stillness that made the room feel smaller. His ears rotated backward half an inch, pupils dilated just enough to darken the amber to near black, and his tail stopped its slow sweep. Ryan's palm hovered an inch above the fur along Jax's lower ribs. For 3 full heartbeats, nothing moved. Then Jax exhaled a sharp, almost silent huff through his nose and flattened himself against the table pad. His legs splayed slightly wider for balance, spine curved in a protective arch, weight pressed so firmly downward that the disposable sheet crinkled under him. Ryan's fingers brushed the fur once. Jax didn't swipe, didn't growl. He simply shifted his hips a fraction to the side, creating the smallest possible gap between Ryan's hand and whatever lay beneath. Ryan froze. "He's pancaking." Sarah stepped forward from her spot by the counter. "That's not the usual role. He's trying to seal the table." Emily knelt beside the table edge, eye level with Jax's face. The cub's gaze locked on hers, wide, bright, still holding that veneer of innocence, but now edged with something sharper. Urgency. He blinked, once slow and deliberate, then let his head drop, so his cheek rested flat on the steel eyes, never leaving her. Ryan tried again, slower this time, sliding his hand under the curve of Jax's ribcage. Jax countered instantly, lifting his hindquarters just enough to slide backward an inch, then dropping his weight again with perfect timing. The motion was fluid, almost elegant but unmistakable. He was covering something. Sarah whispered, "Look at his belly. It's lumpy." Emily leaned closer. Under the thick golden fur right along the midline where Jax's body met the table, there was an irregular shape, soft, irregular, pressing outward just enough to distort the smooth line of his abdomen. She reached out carefully, fingers hovering near the spot without touching. "Jax," she said quietly, "what do you have under there?" Jax's response was immediate. He turned his head toward her voice, pressed his nose into her palm, and gave one quick pleading lick, barely more than a brush of tongue. His eyes stayed locked on hers pupils. Huge expression, pleading. Then he chuffed once short broken, rising at the end, like a question. Ryan kept his hand steady but didn't press. He's begging now, not blocking. Asking. Sarah moved to the other side of the table, crouching low. "If we can just get him to shift a little." Jax sensed the new angle. He rolled his shoulders forward again, curling his front legs under his chest to create a tighter shield. The lump beneath him shifted slightly with the movement, something crinkled plastic on plastic, the sound faint but unmistakable in the quiet room. "That's a bag." Ryan nodded slowly. "Feels like it. Small zipper pouch, maybe." Jax must have heard the word bag. His ears pinned flat for a split second before he recovered, lifting his head to look at Ryan with renewed intensity. He chuffed again, longer, softer, almost apologetic, and stretched his neck to lick the edge of Ryan's glove. The gesture was careful, almost reverent. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "He's still trying to charm us, even now." Emily placed both hands on either side of Jax's face, thumbs brushing the soft fur along his jaw. "Buddy, we're not taking it away forever. We just need to see." Jax blinked at her once, twice, then lowered his head again. For a long moment he stayed perfectly still. Then, with visible reluctance, he eased his weight up just half an inch, just enough for gravity to do the rest. A small canvas pouch slid free from beneath his belly, tumbling softly onto the table pad. It landed zip-aside, up the fabric, worn at the corners, a faint salmon scent drifting from the seams. Ryan reached for it carefully. Jax watched every movement, body tense, but he didn't lunge. He simply let out another chuff, quiet, resigned, and pressed his forehead against Emily's arm. Ryan unzipped the pouch. Inside lay a small collection, half a dozen salmon training treats, still in their original wrapper. A folded blue bandana that smelled faintly of the sanctuary laundry. 2 small rubber balls, one red, one yellow, and a tiny metal key fob-shaped, like a lion's head. Sarah whistled low. "That's quite the stash." Emily stared at the items. "The bandana is from the play yard. The balls are from the enrichment box. And the treats, those are the ones we use for recall training." Ryan lifted the key fob. "This is from the gate lock. How did he even get it?" Jax chuffed once more, short, almost embarrassed, and tucked his head under Emily's elbow, hiding his face against her side. Emily ran her fingers through his mane. "When did you start collecting these, sweetheart?" The answer came in fragments. Jax had been seen carrying the red ball around the yard last month, dropping it behind a log when staff approached. The yellow one had gone missing from the toy bin 2 weeks ago. The bandana had been left out to dry after washing and never made it back to the shelf. The treats, those were from the open bag in the feed room. Jax must have slipped in during evening rounds. But the key fob was the real surprise. The gate lock required it to open the main enclosure. Jax couldn't have reached the hook where it hung unless someone left it within paw range. Ryan set the pouch down. He's been hoarding. Not stealing to destroy. Stealing to keep. Sarah looked at the items spread out. It's like he's building a little nest of his favorite things. Emily felt a pang in her chest. Jax had come from a place where nothing was truly his. Victor Harlan, the breeder who'd kept him in that wire pen, had treated the cubs like inventory. No toys, no soft bedding, no personal space. When the authorities raided the property last year, they found dozens of animals in similar conditions. Harlan had been fined $25,000 and lost his breeding license, but the damage to the animals lingered long after the court date. Jax lifted his head, eyes meeting Emily's. He chuffed softly, almost a whisper, and licked her wrist once. Emily swallowed. You thought you had to hide them, because back then, if you had something nice, someone took it. Jax pressed closer, his weight solid and warm against her leg. Ryan closed the pouch gently and set it on the counter. We'll keep these safe, he said, but we need to make sure nothing in here is causing him any trouble. No sharp edges, no small parts he could swallow. Sarah nodded. The fob has a metal ring. Could be a choking hazard if he chews it. Emily stroked Jax's back in long, slow passes. We'll find a better way for him to keep his treasures. A box in his enclosure, maybe. Something he can open himself. Jax chuffed again, quieter, now calmer. He looked at the pouch, then back at Emily Tail, giving one tentative sweep across the table. Ryan peeled off his gloves. Let's finish the physical while he's settled. No more surprises, I hope. Jax allowed Ryan's hands to move over his flanks again, this time without resistance. The abdomen felt normal once the pouch was removed, no masses, no tenderness. Jax stayed relaxed, eyes half closed, accepting the touch. Emily kept her hand on his shoulder. You're safe, big guy. No one's taking anything from you here. Jax responded by leaning into her touch, the last of the tension easing from his frame. The room felt quieter now, less charged, more settled. The secret was out. The treasures were safe. And Jax, for the first time that morning, looked truly at ease. After the treasures were revealed, Jax suddenly became very quiet. The room lost its earlier energy in an instant. Jax's shoulders rounded forward, ears tilted sideways in a soft droop, and his tail curled tightly around his hind paws. He turned his head away from everyone, slowly, deliberately, until his cheek rested flat against the table pad and his gaze fixed on the far wall. His breathing stayed even but shallower now, the deep chuffs gone. He looked smaller, somehow curled in on himself without moving an inch. Emily felt the shift, like a weight settling in her chest. She slid one hand under his chin, lifting gently until his eyes met hers again. Jax held the contact for only a second before looking away once more, pupils narrowed to thin slits. Ryan set the stethoscope down quietly. He's embarrassed, maybe even ashamed. Sarah stayed by the counter, arms folded, voice low. He's never shut down like this before. Usually he bounces back fast. Emily kept her hand steady under Jax's jaw. Hey, big guy, look at me. She waited until he finally turned his head back, slow, reluctant. His eyes were still bright, but the spark had dimmed. She spoke softly, words measured. Nothing you did was wrong. Those things are yours. We're not mad. We're just glad you're safe. Jax blinked once, slow, heavy, then let his head drop again. He pressed his cheek harder against the pad, ears flattening further. Emily moved closer, resting her forehead lightly against the side of his neck. The warmth of his fur seeped through her skin. She stayed there, breathing in time with him, letting the silence stretch. Ryan watched for a long moment before speaking. We should finish the physical while he's calm. No pressure, just vitals and a quick once-over to make sure he's okay. Emily nodded without lifting her head. Go ahead. He'll let you now. Ryan approached from the side, movements deliberate and unhurried. He placed the stethoscope disc over Jax's left rib cage first. Jax didn't tense. He didn't shift. He simply stayed still, eyes half closed, letting the cold metal rest against his fur. Ryan listened for 30 seconds, long enough to be thorough, then moved to the right side. Lungs still clear, heart steady. He checked Jax's gums next, lifting the lip gently with one gloved finger. Jax allowed it without protest, tongue visible for a moment before retreating. Ryan shone the penlight across the teeth and palate. No inflammation, gums pink and healthy. Sarah handed him the thermometer. Ryan lubricated the probe and lifted Jax's tail just enough to insert it. Jax remained motionless, gaze fixed on the wall again. The device beeped after a minute. 100, 1.2, normal range. Ryan withdrew the probe carefully and disposed of the cover. He ran both hands along Jax's spine in long, even strokes, checking for any knots in the muscle or signs of discomfort. Jax's breathing deepened slightly under the touch, but he didn't pull away. Emily kept her hand on Jax's neck the entire time, thumb moving in small circles behind his ear. "You're doing great, sweetheart." "Almost done." Jax responded with the faintest rumble, barely audible, more vibration than sound. It wasn't a chuff. It was quieter, almost a sigh of acceptance. Ryan finished the spinal check and stepped back. Everything physical looks perfect. Coat, glossy muscles, strong, no tenderness anywhere. He's in excellent shape. Sarah smiled faintly. He always bounces back health-wise. It's the emotional part that takes longer. Emily lifted her head and looked at Jax's face. His ears had lifted a fraction, no longer pinned flat. He turned toward her slowly, nose brushing her wrist. She cupped his cheek with both hands. "We love you here. This place is yours. Your toys, your blanket, your spot in the sun, none of it is going anywhere. You don't have to hide anything from us." Jax blinked, slow, deliberate, then leaned into her palms. The weight of his head felt heavier, now trusting. Emily kept talking, voice low and steady. "You came to us from a place where nothing felt safe. Victor Harlan's operation took that from you, kept you in a cage with nothing to call your own. But that's over. You're part of our family now. The sanctuary is home, and home means you get to keep what matters to you." Jax's tail gave one slow sweep across the table, tentative at first, then stronger. He lifted his head fully and looked around the room at Ryan, at Sarah, back at Emily. His ears swiveled forward, pupils relaxing to their normal size. Sarah stepped closer and rested one hand on Jax's shoulder. "You're stuck with us, kid. Good luck getting rid of that." Jax turned his head toward her touch, pressing briefly against her palm before returning to Emily. He let out a single soft sound, not a chuff, not a rumble, just a quiet exhale that carried relief. Ryan removed his gloves and dropped them in the bin. "We're done with the exam. He's cleared for the day." Emily helped Jax down from the table. He landed lightly, shook himself once shoulders to tail, then leaned against her leg, solid and warm. She clipped the lead to his harness. "Let's head home, buddy. Your yard is waiting." Jax walked beside her toward the door, pace slow, deliberate, no trace of the earlier energy. But as they passed the counter, he paused, turned his head, and looked back at the pouch still sitting there. His tail flicked once. Emily followed his gaze. "We'll bring it home with us. Promise." Jax blinked slow, accepting, then continued forward, pressing his shoulder against her calf in quiet thanks. The hallway felt longer on the way out. Jax padded along without hurry, ears swiveling at every sound, but no longer alert with tension. When they reached the lobby, the receptionist looked up and smiled. "Everything good?" Emily nodded. "He's perfect. Just needed a little extra time today." Jax sat neatly beside her while she signed the checkout form. He looked up at the receptionist's tail, giving one gentle sweep. She reached over the desk and offered her hand. Jax sniffed it once, then pressed his nose briefly against her knuckles, polite, reserved. The receptionist laughed softly. "Even when he's quiet, he's a gentleman." Outside, the afternoon light had shifted golden, slanting through the pines. Jax stepped into the sun, lifted his face toward it, and closed his eyes for a moment. Emily unclipped the lead once they reached the truck, letting him hop into the passenger seat on his own. He settled immediately, head resting on the console, gaze fixed out the windshield. Emily started the engine and pulled out slowly. The drive back to the sanctuary was quiet. Jax didn't fidget. He simply stayed close, shoulder brushing her arm, breathing steady. When they turned onto the sanctuary road, his ears pricked forward at the familiar scent of pine and earth. Emily glanced over. Home sweet home, big guy. Jax lifted his head and looked at her eyes, clear now, spark returning. He chuffed once, short, bright, and leaned into her shoulder. Just when we thought the drama was over, Jax had one final surprise waiting. We reached the lobby without incident. Jax walked beside me at a calm, measured pace, head level, with my hip tail carried in a relaxed curve. The receptionist looked up from her desk and gave a small wave. "See you next month, Jax. Be good." Jax paused, turned his head toward her, and blinked once, slow and regal. She laughed softly and went back to her paperwork. I pushed open the glass door. The afternoon air hit us crisp, carrying the scent of pine and dry grass. Jax stepped through, first pausing on the threshold to lift his nose and inhale deeply. The truck was parked in the side lot, under a stand of aspens. Their leaves had turned a bright gold and fluttered in the breeze. Jax trotted ahead, lead slack in my hand, then slowed to sniff the base of the nearest tree. I let him have the moment. After the morning he'd had a little scent marking. Felt like a small victory. Ryan and Sarah followed us out to say goodbye. Ryan carried the canvas pouch in one hand, holding it loosely by the strap. "We'll drop this off at the sanctuary tomorrow if you want," he said. "Or you can take it now." I reached for it. "I'll take it. He'll sleep better knowing it's home." Sarah crouched to Jax's level. "You gave us quite the show today, mister. Don't make a habit of it." Jax looked at her ears forward, then leaned in and bumped his nose against her knee, quick, affectionate. Sarah scratched behind his ear for a second before standing. Ryan handed me the pouch. "Everything's accounted for. No contraband left behind." I clipped the pouch to the outside of my backpack. Jax watched the motion carefully, then turned toward the truck and hopped up onto the running board without waiting for help. He looked back at me expectantly. All right, I said. "In you go." He jumped into the passenger seat, circled once, and settled with his head on the console. I opened the driver's door, slid in, and started the engine. Ryan and Sarah stood by the clinic entrance, waving as I pulled out. The drive back felt lighter. Jax rested his chin on my arm, eyes half closed, breathing steady. The radio played low, some old country song about open roads. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Jax's shoulder. He didn't fidget. He didn't check in every few minutes. He simply stayed close, warm and quiet. We turned onto the sanctuary road. The gate came into view, metal painted green, padlocked on the inside. I stopped the truck, got out, and walked around to open it. Jax stayed in his seat, watching through the windshield. As I swung the gate wide, I heard a soft thump from inside the cab. I glanced back. Jax had jumped down to the ground and was standing beside the open passenger door, looking up at me with calm innocence. I raised an eyebrow. "You're supposed to wait." He blinked, slow, unconcerned, then trotted past me through the gate, tail high. I shook my head, closed the gate behind the truck, and climbed back in. We drove the short distance to the main house. Jax hopped out the moment the truck stopped, circled the front bumper once, then sat neatly in the grass, waiting. I grabbed my backpack pouch, still clipped to the side, and walked toward the enclosure gate. Jax followed at my heel pace, matched perfectly. When we reached the gate, I unlatched it, stepped inside and held it open for him. He entered without hurry, sniffed the air, then turned back toward me. That's when I noticed it. A small, dark shape protruded from the thick fur along his chest, right where the harness strap crossed his sternum. It was subtle, barely visible unless you knew to look, but unmistakable. Plastic, blue. The exact color of Ryan's favorite ballpoint pen. I stared. Jax. He blinked at me, wide-eyed, completely guileless, then sat down and began grooming his shoulder with exaggerated care. I knelt in front of him. "You didn't." Jax paused mid-lick, looked up at me and chuffed, once short, almost smug. I reached carefully under the harness strap. My fingers closed around the smooth barrel of the pen. It had been tucked perfectly into the dense fur, hidden so well that even during the final check, no one had noticed. I pulled it free. Jax watched the motion, then looked up at me, with those enormous amber eyes, innocent, unblinking. I laughed quiet at first, then louder, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep. Jax tilted his head, ears pricked, clearly pleased with himself. The pen was Ryan's, the one he always kept clipped to his scrub pocket, the same one he'd used to sign the chart earlier. Jax must have slipped it during the goodbye rub against Ryan's leg, tucked it away in one smooth motion while everyone was distracted by the pouch handoff. I sat back on my heels, still laughing. "You absolute professional." Jax stood up, pressed his forehead against my knee, and chuffed again, bright, triumphant. I scratched behind his ears, shaking my head. Ryan and Sarah were going to lose it when they heard this. I clipped the lead back on and walked Jax to his favorite sunspot, a flat rock near the enclosure fence. He hopped up, circled twice, then dropped into a sphinx position, chin on paws, eyes half closed in contentment. I pulled out my phone and texted Ryan a quick photo of the pen with the caption, "He says thank you for the souvenir." The reply came almost immediately. "You're kidding. Tell me you're kidding." I sent back, "Not kidding." "He's very proud." A string of laughing emojis followed, then Sarah just read it over my shoulder. "We're both dying. That little bandit." I pocketed the phone and sat beside Jax on the rock. He shifted closer until his shoulder pressed against my side. The sun warmed the fur along his back. I ran my fingers through it, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "You really are something," I said quietly. Jax lifted his head, looked at me and blinked, slow, deliberate. Then he rested his chin on my thigh and closed his eyes completely. The sanctuary settled around us, birds calling in the pines, wind moving through the aspens, the distant sound of water running in the small stream that bordered the property. Jax stayed there warm and heavy against me, the pen still in my hand like a trophy. I looked down at him and laughed again, soft, helpless. The morning had started with innocence, moved through charm and strategy, hit rock bottom with quiet shame, and ended with this one last perfectly executed heist. And somehow, that final twist made the whole day make sense. Jax had come to us with nothing. He'd learned slowly, carefully, that here he could have things, that they wouldn't disappear overnight, that they were his to keep. So he'd collected them, guarded them, and when the moment felt right, he'd added one more to his collection, not out of malice, out of ownership, out of belonging. I tucked the pen into my pocket. "We'll give it back tomorrow," with a note saying, "Thanks for the loan." Jax exhaled a deep, contented sound and pressed closer. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthened across the grass. Jax stayed right there, head on my leg, eyes closed, the picture of peace. And in that quiet moment, with the pen still warm in my pocket and Jax's steady breathing against my side, I realized something simple. He wasn't just a rescued cub anymore. He was ours, and we were his. Back at the sanctuary later that afternoon, the full meaning of the day settled in. The sun hung low over the foothills, casting long shadows across the enclosure. Jax walked slowly beside me toward the main house paws, pressing soft prints into the dry grass. He no longer carried the morning's tension, shoulders relaxed, tail swaying in a gentle rhythm. When we reached the porch, he paused, looked up at me once, then continued inside without hurry. I followed him to his favorite corner, a wide window seat padded with old blankets. Jax jumped up, circled twice, and dropped into a loose curled chin, resting on his forepaws. His eyes tracked me as I set the backpack down and pulled out a clean water bowl. He watched without moving, breathing steady. I sat on the floor beside him, back against the wall. The house was quiet, only the faint tick of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of wind through the open screen door. Jax shifted closer until his shoulder touched my arm. I rested my hand on his back, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. Days like today don't happen often, but when they do, they leave you thinking long after the moment passes. Jax had spent the entire morning protecting something small, something he considered his. Not food, not a toy he needed to survive, but pieces he'd chosen because they mattered to him. A bandana that smelled like home, balls he'd batted across the yard, treats he associated with good moments. A key fob he'd taken because it opened gates to places he loved. And that pen, Ryan's pen, slipped away in the final seconds because in Jax's mind it belonged in his collection now. He didn't steal out of spite. He collected. Because for the first time in his life he could. Before he came here, everything he touched belonged to someone else. Victor Harlan's operation had been shut down more than a year ago after a multi-agency raid. Federal and state wildlife officers found over 40 big cats and exotic animals kept in substandard conditions. No enrichment, minimal veterinary care, no personal space. Harlan faced felony charges under the Endangered Species Act and the Lacey Act. The court ordered him to pay a $75,000 fine, forfeit all animals, and serve 3 years of probation. Every animal from that property was removed and placed in accredited sanctuaries or zoos. Jax was one of the youngest. He arrived here emaciated, fearful of sudden movements, unwilling to let go of anything he managed to hold. Now, he was different. He trusted the routine. He trusted the people. He trusted that the things he valued wouldn't vanish overnight. So he gathered them quietly, methodically, and guarded them the only way he knew how. With charm, with persistence, with every tool in his considerable arsenal. I looked down at him. Jax had closed his eyes, but his ears stayed forward, listening. I spoke softly, more to myself than to him. You taught us something today, big guy. You reminded us why we do this work. It's not just about food and shelter. It's about giving animals the chance to own something, to have preferences, to make choices, to feel secure enough to collect little pieces of their world. Jax opened his eyes and looked at me, steady, calm. I continued. Places like Harlan's remind us what happens when responsibility gets ignored. Animals suffer. Trust breaks. Recovery takes years. But sanctuaries exist to reverse that. We give space. We give time. We give safety. So animals like you can learn what it means to belong. Jax exhaled a slow, deep breath and shifted so his head rested fully on my lap. His weight felt grounding. I ran my fingers along the edge of his ear. You're healthy. You're strong. You're attached to this place, to the people here, to the small things that make it yours. That's what matters most. The light outside softened to gold. Jax stayed where he was, breathing in sync with me. I thought about the clinic, Ryan and Sarah laughing over the text, the pouch of treasures waiting on the kitchen counter, the pen I'd set beside it. Jax had turned a routine check into something unforgettable. Not because of drama alone, but because of what came after: the quiet acceptance, the return to trust, the simple act of leaning in again. That's the real story of rescue work. The loud moments get attention, the clever tricks, the surprises, the laughter, but the quiet ones carry the weight. The moment an animal stops guarding, stops hiding, stops expecting loss. The moment they believe they're home. Jax lifted his head suddenly, ears swiveling toward the window. A small flock of sparrows landed on the feeder outside. He watched them for a long minute, then settled back down, chin on my knee. I smiled. You're going to keep us on our toes, aren't you? He chuffed once, soft content, and closed his eyes again. The day had started with innocence, played to perfection. It ended with trust earned all over again. Jax was healthy, physically flawless after the exam, and emotionally stronger than when we left that morning. He knew his things were safe. He knew his people weren't going anywhere. And he knew deep down that he belonged. That's what sanctuaries are for. Not just to heal bodies, but to rebuild certainty. To show that the world can be kind. That belongings can stay. That love doesn't disappear when you're not looking. I stayed there on the floor until the light faded completely. Jax's breathing deepened into sleep. I kept my hand on his back, steady, warm, feeling the rhythm of a heart that had learned to trust again. Outside, the pines whispered in the evening breeze. Inside, the house settled into quiet. Jack slept on safe attached home. And in that stillness, the day's meaning felt complete.